After just recently having watched the American live-action adaptation of Ghost in the Shell, I can tell you that this is one of the most embarrassing films I've ever had the discomfort of sitting through. Quite frankly, this film was an empty shell in comparison to the masterful work of Mamoru Oshii back in 1995. The fact that this film carries the same name as one of the best Japanese animated films to ever be made is simply disgraceful. So I'd like to discuss the problem with Ghost in the Shell 2017. To discuss why this film fails on multiple levels, I feel the need to discuss both why it fails as a film under the Ghost in the Shell name, and also why it simply fails as a film. So in order to discuss those two, I feel I must first discuss the original. The original Ghost in the Shell film is an anime action crime film, directed by Mamoru Oshii, back in 1995. This film is heralded as one of the best Japanese animated features of all time. This is for a multitude of different reasons that accumulate into a beautiful work of art that has stood the test of time and continues to be an influence on filmmakers today. It does so by having fantastic animation, subtlety in its storytelling, and presenting interesting themes that beg for further analysis. It really isn't as simple as just watching it. It's much more of an intellectual experience that challenges your thoughts. Probably the most prominent theme asking, what defines life? Off of this question, a story is built around a cyborg named Major Motoko Kusanagi, who questions her humanity after being completely stripped of anything that made her human, except for her ghost. In this film, the ghost is referenced as several things such as a soul or a mind, meaning it is still the same person inside the cybernetic shell, hence the name Ghost in the Shell. However, this name also takes on multiple different meanings when dissecting the film. One such example can be found early on in the movie when a few minutes of the film are dedicated to shots of the cyberpunk 2029 Japan. However, despite it being in the future, it displays minimalistic shots of people doing the mundane in a world that also feels mundane and even broken down, showing that society has also become a ghost in the shell in the wake of the now commonplace cybernetic enhancements. Also, speaking of minimalism, the film has a great handle of its action scenes that makes them genuinely tense because they don't misuse the action unlike the vast majority of all other action films. There's a purpose to every bit of action shown, and because of that, these scenes become enticing because we, as viewers, don't know what to expect next. Success isn't found in beating an enemy, but instead finding an answer to the question the film has been asking. The film doesn't end on a regular note, but it does end on a satisfying one. This uniqueness in the film helps add to the story instead of taking away from it with cliched scenes. It's subtle and stylistic, it's refreshing and beautiful. There's so much that goes into this movie that makes it an absolutely amazing experience. Of course, now is the portion where I discuss the reimagining of the film into a stripped-down, castrated ghost of its former self. Let's discuss the issues with Ghost in the Shell 2017. As previously mentioned, sitting down in the cinema to watch this version of a beloved movie was honestly embarrassing to do. Whether remake, reimagining, or whatever you want to call it, this version of the film is not only disgraceful to the fans of the original, but also disgraceful to cinema as a whole, but I'll get into why in a minute. If I were to try and describe this movie to someone, I would most likely tell them that it's basically a bad RoboCop. And I don't mean the old good RoboCop, I mean the new bad RoboCop. And what I mean to say by that is they took a generic action film and they added small little hints of the original film that completely fell flat on their faces because of their lack of meaning or substance behind them. In other words, it's just cheap fan service. They take the iconic scenes that define the original because of their elegance and beautiful animation, and they butcher it into meaningless, incoherent action. Let's take, for example, the opening scene of the original where Major assassinates this guy, and then fades away into the city using her invisibility. It's a fantastic scene that's very simplistic, to the point, and does a great job of setting up for what the rest of the movie feels like. In the live action version, however, this scene is turned into something completely different. Here, many of the same beats and shots are taken and transformed into mindless action, and I do mean mindless. One could only believe that they wanted to show off their special effects because here they have Major go invisible as she jumps off of the building only to attack some assailants in the building while visible. It might just be me, but I don't really see any purpose to any of it. It all just kind of seems messy, as if the film doesn't know what it wants to be. It keeps trying to imitate the scenes of old, but without what made those scenes so special in the first place. It's so lost as to whether it wants to be the original film or something completely new, and the end product is an abomination of both ends. For example, let's take the scene between Major and Bato on the boat after Major just came up out of diving. In the original film, this scene's purpose was to further develop their characters, their relationship, and to further illustrate how the characters feel about themselves and one another. Keep in mind both Major's and Bato's cybernetic bodies. Major questions her identity as human or machine. She questions if she's even truly alive. She also expresses her want to be something more, while Bato has no such questioning and appears to never really have preoccupied himself with the question in the first place. He views both of them as humans, expressing that their ghosts, their souls and minds, are what truly keeps them human. This is perfectly encapsulated later on in the same scene when Major is shown undressing near Bato and he looks away as she does so. She doesn't see herself as human, so why dignify herself as such? Meanwhile, Bato is constantly attempting to look away or cover her when she's in a state of undress. This simple matter alone expresses volumes about their character. Now let's analyze the same scene in the new film. While being able to visually emulate the scene from the original just about beat for beat, there's a stunning lack of substance. And why is this the case? Well, that scene was built around those interactions. The setting, the tone, everything was meticulous to present these characters in the light that they wanted to be shown. Not only that, but the matters of the two films are completely different. In the original, we're asking ourselves, what constitutes as life? While in the new version, we're asking ourselves, what happened to her life? Because of the two completely different premises, the substance of the original scene is completely lost. When we get to the point where Major's in a state of undress in the new version, it fails to encapsulate any feeling at all. It could have been forgivable if there was something to be added from it, but instead, it seems like much more of a nod to the older fans. It feels like they're attempting to make audiences feel like this is a faithful adaptation, which is again, the root of the issue with the film. In the attempt to keep faithful and simultaneously bring something new, it loses those moments of character development that are integral for an audience to care about the characters. And with the already bland development given to the characters and the abysmal pacing because of the film being lost as to how it wants to progress, it leads to a feeling of apathy within the viewers, which, unless the intent, is something that no filmmaker yearns for. Major developed from a deep, relatable, and unique character in the original to what I can only say is a bad RoboCop in the 2017 version. And the reason for this being regressive is because it's a character that we've seen the likes of before, yet unfortunately manages to miss several marks to make that character interesting. For example, Scarlett Johansson's performance was a strange mix of completely robotic at times and entirely human at others. It probably wouldn't have been too much of a gripe for me if they had just stuck to one consistent style. But this inconsistency that is very easy to fix tells me just how much effort went into the making of this film. Speaking of effort, let's discuss the effort put into the special effects. This film basically suffers from the same issue that 2016's Doctor Strange does. It's absolutely true that the CGI in the film looks pretty great, there's no denying that, but it lacks any function within the movie and it's just kind of there. The most I could think of possibly being the purpose is to show the growing dependency of technology in the world society, but not only does that not feel intentional, it also doesn't really mix with the message that they're trying to portray in the film. Whereas in the original, the city looks extremely mundane, and everything the people do in it is also mundane. This gives the Ghost in the Shell meaning not only to Major, but to that world society, and it is played off in a masterful and beautiful way. Ultimately, it would be easy for me to continue to pick apart this film because of its lack of ingenuity and the fairly lazy way it was pieced together. There's nothing about this film that stands out as something meaningful or interesting aside from possibly a few visuals that are squandered by their lack of substance or intent. And it kind of hurt to watch because as I was doing so, I'm being reminded of the fantastic work of Mamoru Oshii and how all of the tropes like the unique cyberpunk animation to the several intriguing and thought-provoking themes displayed throughout the movie are thrown away to make what accumulates to a below-average action film. And luckily, it appears that the fans have realized this and decided not to watch it as well. This probably has mostly to do with the reputation that the live-action adaptations of anime films have. Even so, it's disappointing to see yet another one fail, because at the rate that this is going, live-action adaptations of anime films may cease to produce, which isn't what I want at all. Surely I don't want these low-quality generic films, but under the right hands and the correct guidance, I'm sure that us fans of anime films can finally get what we've always wanted. But for now, we're stuck with a movie that is very rapidly being shunned and for good reason. For those of you that haven't gone around to doing so, I highly recommend the original 1995 animated film. I've already talked about several defining scenes and themes, but words simply can't do the film justice. It's an outstanding story that really no other film mimics, and it's one of my favorite anime films. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you all thought about Ghost in the Shell down in the comment section below, and I'll see you all later.